My name is Henry Louis Gates Jr., and I have the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Department of African and African American Studies and the director of the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute for African and African American Research. I'd like to thank the Kennedy School, President Larry Summers, Provost Steve Hyman, and Dean William Kirby for so generously supporting this event this evening. Now, we have gathered here tonight to celebrate the 70th birthday of Wole Soyinka, the 1986 Nobel Laureate in Literature. The first person of African descent ever to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, ladies and gentlemen. Now, while Professor Soyinka's birthday was celebrated last July as a national event in his native Nigeria, we at the Du Bois Institute, where he is a fellow, wanted to find a way to commemorate this important milestone in his life here at Harvard. Now, Wole is our very first Alphonse Fletcher Fellow at the Du Bois Institute, a fellowship conceived and funded by our principal patron, Alphonse Fletcher Jr. Mr. Fletcher, known as Buddy to his friends, has been our most generous donor over the past 14 years, endowing, among other things, the Alphonse Fletcher Jr. University Professorship, formerly occupied by our dear friend, Cornel West. I am so pleased to be able to announce this evening that Mr. Fletcher has agreed to fund Professor Soyinka's stay with us again next year as our second Alphonse Fletcher visiting professor at the Du Bois Institute. Now, if Buddy were here, I wanted him to stand up, but he knew that, so he's only going to show up for the dinner afterwards. So how do you celebrate the birthday of a man whose entire country, it seemed to be last summer, marked the occasion with an event every day for 2 solid weeks? Think about it. What, in other words, do you give the person who has everything? Well, it occurred to me that the only thing that we could give Wole Soyinka for his 70th birthday was a feast, but a feast of words. Words created by some of his favorite writers who also happen to be fellow Nobel laureates. So, I wrote them a letter, and to my astonishment, they agreed to join us at Harvard this evening for this marvelous celebration. Now, each will read selections from her or his work for 10, 15 minutes, and each will be introduced by one of our illustrious introducers. Now, following the readings, we'll have a bit of time for questions from you. You all know the drill. You'll have to stand up in front of those microphones. But before we hear from our guest, let me say a brief word or two about Wole Soyinka. Soyinka has earned a reputation as the conscience of Nigeria, and in a nation where the average lifespan is 52, turning 70 is achievement enough. In Soyinka's case, though, turning 70 is nothing short of a miracle. When Wole Soyinka was 33, he was imprisoned without trial for attempting to broker a peace with the Biafran secessionists. For his effort, he spent 24 months in jail, 24 of which were in solitary confinement in a 4x8 prison cell, which he memorably described in a poem written on toilet paper with homemade ink. The poem was smuggled out of prison and published widely in the West. He was arrested at least 9 times since that time. Most recently, last May, at a rally demanding the resignation of Nigeria's current president, whose re-election, let us say politely, is widely believed to have involved voting fraud. Soyinka has been in exile 3 times. I studied with him in 1973 at the University of Cambridge during one of those periods of expatriation where he and my dear friend Anthony Appia, whom you'll be hearing from a little bit later, introduced me to the wonders of the African world, and to the sheer pleasures of the life of the mind. Soyinka has had a price on his head at least 5 times, most notoriously in 1997 when he was tried in absentia for treason and sentenced to death by the brutal military regime of General Sani Abacha. He has only narrowly escaped several attempts on his life. But if democracy in Nigeria, the world's most populous black nation, of course, has a voice and a face, they belong to Wole Soyinka. And not just Nigeria. Soyinka's advocacy for democracy has always extended well beyond Nigeria's borders. In the mid-'70s, for example, while black American civil rights leaders such as CORE's Roy Innis refused to criticize Idi Amin's murderous rampages in Uganda out of some misbegotten sense of racial solidarity, Soyinka relentlessly campaigned for Amin's overthrow. When other blacks castigated him for quote-unquote race betrayal, Soyinka replied, and I quote, "Criticism, like charity, starts at home." In the face of tyranny, Soyinka concludes a choice must be made by each of us, and I quote, "It's my duty to fight those who have chosen to belong to the party of death," he writes, "those who say they receive their orders from God somewhere and believe they have a duty to set the world on fire to achieve their own salvation, whether they're in the warrens of Iraq or in the White House. I prefer," he concludes, "to be a card-carrying member of the party of life." When I tried to decide what unites the writers gathered here this evening, the words that President Kennedy wrote in his homage to his favorite poet, Robert Frost, of course, came to mind, and I quote, "When power leads man toward arrogance, poetry reminds him of his limitations. When power narrows the area of man's concern, poetry reminds him of the richness and diversity of existence. When power corrupts, poetry cleanses." It is this sort of cleansing, ladies and gentlemen, a cleansing of the spirit and the soul, a cleansing indeed of the imagination, that not only characterizes the work of the writers gathered here this evening, but which our country is urgently in need of today. It is the work of poetry, the poetry of the creative process itself, pushed to its highest level of literary fulfillment, that our writers gathered here tonight embody in their works. Now, for the rest of the evening, they will share their words with us as a most subtle and elegant way of saying happy birthday to our honored guest, my friend and my professor, Wole Soyinka. Now it gives me great pleasure to welcome to the podium the Honorable Margaret Marshall, Chief Justice of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, who will introduce our first Nobel Laureate.
It cannot often be that a judge is asked to introduce a distinguished person of letters. And faced this evening with such a challenge, I am reminded of Nadine Gordimer's description of creative paralysis. Looking down while crossing a canyon on a tightrope. So let me say this in the simplest way. I am an enormous, enormous admirer of Nadine Gordimer and her writing. One might be tempted to presume that my admiration stems from a shared history. We both grew up as children of privilege, white children, in the rigidly racist and inhibited colonial society of small-town provincial South Africa. Our vision of the world took shape on the hard, cruel anvil of apartheid. We both found the voice of our conscience in words, mine in the law, hers in the potent works of imagination. But it is much more than a commonality of formative experiences that draws me to Nadine Gordimer's works. Like readers the world over, I am touched again and again by the gifts she has shared with us. Her humanity, her fierce integrity, her deep commitment to exposing the twisted roots of racism and all forms of inequality, her transcendent quest for justice through truth-telling. Others have captured these qualities better than I. Nadine Gordimer is archivist and lighthouse keeper, writes Per Vosberg. Above her collective experience, the light sweeps, illuminating parts that would otherwise have lain in darkness, helping us navigate towards a South Africa that depicts a universal landscape. Paul Thoreau calls Gordimer one of the most reliable witnesses to the seismic South African transformation since apartheid fell. And for Seamus Heaney, she is one of the gorillas of the imagination. Gordimer herself has said that the best way a writer can serve a revolution is to write as well as he can. Having written as well as she can for over 50 years, Nadine Gordimer is justly celebrated as a moving force in the revolution of the human spirit. Please welcome Nadine Gordimer.
I didn't expect to have a double joy that has come to me tonight. To have my old friend, Margie, I find it very difficult to give her full title that she's well earned as a judge. To me, she's still just the wild girl. The wild girl defying apartheid, defying the local police who indeed harassed everybody at the university where she was. And my admiration for her has grown and grown, and indeed been a tremendous joy and pride to me. I'm very chuffed to think that she now has the position that she has. And as I say, this is a bonus, because to be here to celebrate Wole Soyinka, whom I revere and admire as someone absolutely indispensable to the African continent and to wherever justice is threatened anywhere in the world, and at the same time has the wonderful gift of being a great writer. I'm going to read a bit from a story which stems from the time of the Mozambique War. And you'll have to think that it's being spoken by a girl of about 11 or 12. This was the time that, indeed, you'll all perhaps remember, and certainly Margie, when people fled Mozambique in those years of civil war, and came to South Africa. It was apartheid South Africa, but looked after by their own people, fellow Africans. They would go through tremendous dangers to come to South Africa. It's called The Ultimate Safari because I saw in a British newspaper a travel agent advertising, come to Africa, we can give you the ultimate safari. But I think that there was another kind of ultimate safari, and unfortunately it's going on all over the world still today, people looking for refuge over borders. That night, our mother went to the shop and she didn't come back. What happened? I don't know. My father also had gone away one day and never come back, but he was fighting in the war. We were in the war too, but we were children. We were like our grandmother and grandfather. We didn't have guns. The people my father was fighting The bandits, they're called by our government, ran all over the place. We were very frightened. And we were completely bewildered, didn't know where to go. So they decided, our grandmother and our grandfather did, he made little noises and he rocked from side to side, which she took no notice, that we would go away. We children were pleased. We wanted to go away from where our mother wasn't and where we were hungry. We wanted to go where there were no bandits and where there was food. We were glad to think that there was going to be such a place away. To get there, we had to go through the Kruger Park. We knew about the Kruger Park, a kind of whole country of animals, elephants, lions, jackals, hyenas, hippos, crocodiles, all kinds of animals. We'd had some of them in our own country before the war. Oh, our grandfather remembers, we kids weren't born yet. But the bandits kill the elephants and sell their tusks, and the bandits and our soldiers have eaten all the buck. So we started to go away. There were women and other children like me who had to carry the small ones on their backs when the women got tired. A man led us into the Kruger Park. "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" I kept asking our grandmother. "Not yet," the man said. And when she asked him for me, he told us we had to take a long way round to get round the fence, which he explained would kill you. Roast off your skin the moment you touched it, like the wires high up on poles that give electric light in our towns. I've seen that sign of a head without eyes or skin or hair on it, on an iron box at the mission hospital we used to have before it was blown up. When I asked the next time, they said we'd been walking in the Kruger Park for an hour, but it looked just like the bush we'd been walking through all day, and we hadn't seen any animals except the monkeys and birds which live around us at home, and a tortoise that couldn't get away from us. My firstborn brother and the other boys brought it to the man so it could be killed and we could cook and eat it. He let it go because he told us we couldn't make a fire. All the time we were in the park, we mustn't make a fire because the smoke would show we were there. Police, wardens would come and send us back where we came from. He said we must move like animals among the animals, away from the roads, away from the white people's camps. And at that moment I heard, I'm sure I was the first to hear, cracking branches and the sound of something parting grasses, and I almost squealed because I thought it was the police, the wardens, the people he was telling us to look out for, and that they'd found us already. But it was an elephant, and another elephant, and more elephants. Big blocks of dark moved wherever you looked between the trees. They were curling their trunks round the red leaves of the mapani trees and stuffing them into their mouths. The babies leant against their mothers. The almost grown-up ones wrestled like my firstborn brother with his friends, only they used trunks instead of arms. I was so interested, I forgot to be afraid. The man said we should just stand still and be quiet while the elephants passed. They passed very slowly because elephants are too big to need to run from anyone. We walked at night as well as in the day. We could see the fires where white people were cooking in the camps, and we could smell the smoke and the meat. We watched the hyenas with their backs that sloped as if they're ashamed, slipping through the bush after the smell. If one turned its head, you saw it had big, brown, shining eyes like our own when we looked at each other in the dark. The wind brought voices in our own language from the compounds where the people who work in the camps live. A woman among us wanted to go to them at night and ask them to help us. "They can give us food from the dustbins," she said, and she started wailing, and our grandmother had to grab her and put a hand over her mouth. The man who led us had told us that we must keep out of the way of our people who worked at the Kruger Park. If they helped us, they'd lose their work. If they saw us, all they could do was pretend they'd seen only animals. We were tired, so tired. My firstborn brother and the man had to lift our grandfather from stone to stone where we found places to cross the rivers. Our grandmother's strong, but her feet were bleeding. We couldn't carry the baskets on our head any longer. We couldn't carry anything except my little brother. We left our things under a bush. as long as our bodies get there, our grandmother said. Then we ate some wild fruit we didn't know from home, and our stomachs ran. We were in grass called elephant grass because it's nearly as tall as an elephant. That day we had those pains. And our grandfather, he couldn't just get down in front of people like my little brother. He went off into the grass to be on his own. We had to keep up, the man who led us always kept telling us. We must catch up. But we asked him to wait for our grandfather. So everyone waited for our grandfather to catch up. But he didn't. It was the middle of the day. Insects were singing in our ears, and we couldn't hear him moving through the grass. We couldn't see him because the grass was so high and he was so small. But he must have been somewhere there, inside his loose trousers and his torn shirt. We knew he couldn't have gone far, because he was weak and slow. We all went to look for him, but in groups, so we too wouldn't be hidden from each other in that grass. It got into our eyes and noses. We called him softly, but the noise of the insects must have filled the little space left for hearing in his ears. We looked and looked, but we couldn't find him. We stayed in that long grass all night. In my sleep, I found him curled round in a place he'd tramped down for himself, like the places we'd seen where the buck hide their babies. When I woke up, he still wasn't anywhere. So we looked again, and by now there were paths we'd made by going through the grass many times. It would be easy for him to find us if we couldn't find him. All that day we just sat and waited. Everything's very quiet when the sun is on your head, inside your head, even if you lie, like the animals, under the trees. I lay on my back and I saw those ugly birds with hooked beaks and plucked necks flying round and round above us. We passed them often where they were feeding on the bones of dead animals. Nothing was ever left there for us to eat. Round and round, high up and then lower down and then high again, I saw their necks poking to this side and that, flying round and round. I saw our grandmother, who sat up all the time with my little brother on her lap, was seeing them too. In the afternoon, the man who led us came to our grandmother and told her the other people must move on. He said, if the children don't eat soon, they will die. Our grandmother said nothing. I'll bring you water before we go, he told her. Our grandmother looked at us, me, my firstborn brother, and my little brother on her lap. We watched the other people getting up to leave. I didn't believe the grass would be empty all around us where they'd been, that we'd be alone in this place, the Kruger Park. The police or the animals would find us. Tears came out of my eyes and nose onto my hands, but our grandmother took no notice. She got up with her feet apart the way she puts them when she's going to lift firewood at home in our village. She swung my little brother up onto her back and tied him into her cloth. She said, come. So we left the place with the long grass. Left behind, we went with the others and the man who led us. We started to go away again. There's a very big tent, bigger than a church or a school, tied down to the ground. I didn't understand that that was what it would be when we got there, away. I saw a thing like that the time our mother took us to town because she heard our soldiers were there and she wanted to ask them if they knew where our father was. In that tent, people were praying and singing. This one is blue and white, like that one, but it's not for praying and singing. We live in it with other people who've come from our country. The sister from the clinic says we're 200 without counting the babies, and we have new babies. Some were born on the way through the Kruger Park. The people in the village have let us join them in their school. I was surprised to find that they speak our language. Our grandmother told me that's why they allow us to stay on their land. Long ago, in the time of our fathers, there was no fence that kills you. There was no Kruger Park between them and us. We were the same people under our own king. Right from our village we left to this place that we've come to. Some white people came to take photographs of our people living in that tent. They said they were making a film. I've never seen what that is, though I know about it. A white woman squeezed into our space and asked my grandmother questions, which were told to us in our language by someone who understands the white woman's. How long have you been living like this? She means here, our grandmother said. in this tent 2 years and 1 month. And what do you hope for the future? Nothing. I'm here. But for your children, I want them to learn so that they can get good jobs and money. Do you hope to go back to Mozambique, to your own country? I will not go back. But when the war is over, you won't be allowed to stay here. Don't you want to go home? I didn't think our grandmother wanted to speak again. I didn't think she was going to answer the white woman. The white woman put her head on one side and smiled at us. Our grandmother looked away from her and spoke. There is nothing, no home. Why does our grandmother say that? Why? I'll go back. I'll go back through that Kruger Park. After the war, if there are no bandits anymore, our mother may be waiting for us. And maybe when we left our grandfather, he was only left behind. He found his way, somehow slowly, through the Kruger Park, and he'll be there. They'll be home, and I'll remember them.
Wow. I'm delighted to invite my colleague, Jamaica Kincaid, novelist and lecturer in African and African American Studies and English and American Literature and Language here at Harvard, to introduce our next Nobel Laureate.
Derek Walcott. How to do this? Derek Walcott was born in Castries, St. Lucia, an island in the West Indies, in 1930. His father painted pictures, as he does now, and his mother was a school teacher. He and his brother, twins, I didn't know you were a twin, spent their childhood there. He attended school in St. Lucia, receiving an education, a good one, that made the British once again thank themselves for their own empire. Later, he attended the University of the West Indies in Jamaica, and after graduating, he moved to Trinidad in 1953. In Trinidad, he began to write poetry and plays, and there in 1959, he founded the Trinidad Theatre Workshop. His first book of poems, In a Green Night, was published in 1962. It was followed by, among others, of course. It was followed by others, of course, by many others, of course. The first one I came in contact with was Another Life in 1973. It was sent to me by his editor, a great woman named Pat Strawn. This was in 1978. I then was just publishing some very, very short stories in the New Yorker. She sent me that book with a note saying that when I felt I wanted to publish a book, she hoped I would consider letting her be the publisher. The note was very nice, but in those days, life wasn't so desperate, so I didn't pay much attention to it. I paid attention to the book. Because in 1978, when I was almost 30 years old, I had no idea that people from my part of the world, the people with whom I shared a common history, a common memory, wrote books. Good books. Books my whole education had prepared me to read. I read that book, Another Life. It is his first epic poem, more than once. Not long after that, I met Derek Walcott. He was introduced to me by his editor, who also became my editor, and the first thing he asked me was if I had read, and he named a lot of writers, all of them from the English-speaking West Indies, none of them I had ever heard of. How did he know that I had never heard of them? He then made me a list of books and authors I should read. And incidentally, except for Jean Rhys, they were all men. But that is a whole other subject. For a long time, English-speaking writers from the Caribbean were mostly men. Anyway, I did read them. I say all this because I want to say briefly how important this particular poet how important this particular poet is to these particular people, the English-speaking people in the Caribbean. We need poets. Everyone needs them. We need them to tell them who we are and who we are not. We knew who the other people were. And by the we, in this case, I'm talking about people from the English-speaking Caribbean. We needed a poet, but we didn't even know. We knew who the other people, and by the other people I now mean the British. We knew especially who the British people were, and we knew deeply who they were through their poetry. Since we had none of our own, no poet to make poetry for us, we took theirs. If we wanted to speak of love, living, dying, sadness, we looked to Shakespeare, Wordsworth, and all the rest. If we wanted to speak of the landscape in which we lived, we looked to them. We looked to a British poet's adoration of the place in which he sought his soul to find our own. In that way, we could see we were not totally whole. We were only, so to speak, half-baked. Even as it is true that laws can't make poets, but poets can make laws, so it is true that people can't make a poet, but a poet can make a people. For it is this poet, in his godlike, Adam-like way, who names us, who has sought us out, sought us out, placed us, and gives that place a name. Starting with the luminous Another Life, a poem that had a great influence on my self-absorption, it tempered it. And continuing with Sea Grapes, The Star Apple Kingdom, The Arkansas Testament, and The Astonishing Omerous, Derek Walcott made these people. He made us. These poems showed us how we arrived through such a tragedy to live in a hell that was really a paradise. It remains our lot to this day to live in hell, in somebody else's paradise. But through him, we see time and again how good we are, how noble we are, how exceptional we are, how wretched and just plain bad we are, how ordinary we are. In 1992, Derek Walcott was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. This prize belongs to him, but he belongs to us. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm going to read from sections of the Odyssey, an adaptation that I did for the Royal Shakespeare Company in England. In this section, a philosopher who is going to be beaten to death defies the police, the soldiers of the Cyclops. When I was doing this section of the play, I didn't want to write a piece that had some huge mountainous, Disney-like creature that would come out with one eye. It's very hard to do anyway, and expensive. 2 eyes is cheaper. Anyway, so I thought, how can I place this? And I thought, well, the equivalent of that, I think, is like a very great time in Greece, and that was the time of the colonels, a fascist time. So I set it there, and Odysseus and his crew arrive at this city that they don't recognize, but which is now ruled by the Cyclops. The idea is very Orwellian. In other words, the one eye is the eye that watches us daily, television particularly, and so that the presence of the Cyclops is also a technological presence. Before the philosopher is beaten, he says this, which simply is a statement saying that he never took part in the celebration of the dictator. I think that has been Wole's example, a very heroic, he doesn't like to be told that, and he's okay to think that, but it is a heroic example. I remember being in Washington at a reading with Robert Hayden when somebody announced that Soyinka had died. I immediately applauded. No, sorry. I was very, very moved by that, but he hadn't, of course. But everybody in that room was enormously saddened by that rumor. So this is what the philosopher says before he's beaten. Yet I was one among many thousands in the square, but always too late, too far at the back to see the smiles of the tiny faces on the balcony, those in front with the caps, braids, and medals, and those at the rear in coats and identical hats who didn't wave like the central one, turning both profiles repeatedly into a coin or a postage stamp. I had to be there with the roaring victims who craned or held up children and yelped and jumped high like dogs that you were training in that boxed, crammed square that felt like a mass grave, to a drifting smell of formaldehyde or adrenaline. Learn what I remember, that someday it could save. But I swear on my grave now that it's all over, and the square and the balcony empty, I was there, but I didn't wave. The Cyclops now appears, and Odysseus and his men look at him and then lower their heads. Cyclops, don't stare. Sorry. What is your name? Nobody. Where are you from? Nowhere. Where are you going? I don't know. Nobody from nowhere going where he doesn't know. Normal? No? Yes. What do you believe in? Nothing for now. Nothing? Not the great I? Not yet. Not yet. Yet. Why not yet? I don't know you. I see all, everything. You believe I see all? No. No. You don't see anybody. I see you. I'm nobody. So you said. All you see is nobody and nothing. The eye likes you. The ugliest thing is a liar. So you're really ugly, sir. No. How ugly am I? Man, you're so ugly nobody would believe it. Except you. I'm nobody, dude. You're ugly. I believe it. God, what accent is that? I'm going to die. Oh, you will, boss. Stop. You're making me cry. Laughter and tears, right? Pouring from the one eye. I'm exhausted. You're funny. I'll see you again. Not if I see you first, man. You're a killer, nobody. Not as much as you, my man. You're coming to dinner. I thought I was dinner. What do we do now? Think, Captain Odysseus. Cyclops leaves. You must have some ideas. You're famous for scheming. Let me think. There's some way out of this. They're coming back. Oh, God, let us all be dreaming. Come on, then. They need us. Don't whimper, don't bend. Generations of men flung like seeds on the wind. Listen, the Cyclops likes me. I'm his good friend. Oh, God, sir. Oh, God, please, Captain. Leave him behind. So that night, Odysseus and the Cyclops are having dinner. And I was really desperate in many ways to try to connect the authentic, original thing with my version of it. So I was that desperate to call the Cyclops servant Ram. If you know what I mean, I'm referring to the fact that Odysseus escaped under the sheep, the flock. So I thought, well, how could they have dinner? And I thought, oh yeah, I know, a fondue. So what we had was a big bowl boiling and little pieces of his men that they were eating on skewers. Know what you're eating? Your men, as good as sheep. And do you know what they call these drops from my ears? My eyes, tears. My eyes cloud when I laugh. You must teach me to weep. Well, first you must lose things you loved. Then cry like this? Not quite. I like laughing. Make me laugh, little man. Make you laugh. All right. Know where I can cross my eyes? Why? God gave us two eyes because we're human. I'm not. One is for laughter, the other one cries. Do it. Show me. Ram, come here. Take a look at this. Very good, sir. Nobody I know can do it. I love nobody. Same here. Nobody loves you. Look, why do you need two eyes? One does just as well. For balance, proportion, contrast. Mortals need two. I'm a demigod. Left, right, good, bad, heaven, hell. I have deified myself, son of Poseidon. I know your father, the sea. He doesn't like me. Why, I'll talk to him. Gods, who knows what side they're on. He's rough-tempered most times, but he can act calmly. Put in a good word, then. I'm trying to get home. Home? You're home now. Well, this wasn't quite my idea. Not your idea. There are no ideas in this kingdom. I have a wife, you see. Like my eyes, we make one pair. Where's that, my little friend? Tell me where you come from. A rock, too stony for horses, with swirling shores. What flocks do you have? Goats? Sheep? Is it a kingdom? Yes. And are you its king? Yes, but it's not like yours. In what way? Its subjects don't end up on skewers. Like your men, you mean? Right. How many have I eaten? Of my crew, just 2. I suppose before them scores. They are tenderized by torches. The flesh is beaten, while your sheep bleat in fear of their devourer. But I'm saving you for last. Well, that's very kind. Thank you. 2 of my crew and 1 philosopher. Is this him? No more ideas, the last of his kind. Look how this little iron lance glows at the tip. Stick it in the meat. Too hot. Ram, get a clean one. No, it's all right, really. I'll pick it up. Ram, a clean skewer. No, really. That's the way I am. Sorry, I hate losing things. Get off your knees. My men, my money, my way home. Your life next. That I don't mind. Just hate losing things. I'll help you look. That's 3 eyes. Fine. Where did it go? It couldn't have gone far, and Ram will be back soon. I give up, but I hate to. One thing you should know. What's that? The sky goes pitch black when there is no moon. He crawls near the Cyclops, takes out the skewer, and blinds him. Nobody has escaped. Nobody blinded me. Repeat, no one has escaped. Keep looking for him. Nobody's escaped. Nobody's blinded the eye. Nobody, you hear me? Nobody's his name. Odysseus, son of Poseidon, you obscene octopus, you ton of squid shit with your eye pouring black ink. My name is not nobody. It's Odysseus. And learn, you bloody tyrants, that men can still think.
Well, I can't believe this myself. It's amazing. Our third Nobel laureate in literature will be introduced by Homi K. Bhabha, the Anne F. Rothenberg Professor of English and American Literature and Language here at Harvard.
I would very much like to thank my dear friend Skip Gates for turning a rather dreary evening in a small town into something like Athens. In its great moments. If you ever have the singular pleasure of introducing Miss Toni Morrison, Nobel Laureate, Pulitzer Prize winner, holder of the 2000 National Humanities Medal, Chevalier d'Honneur of the French Republic, professor, publisher, lyricist, librettist, daughter, mother, friend, and much else, if you have that rare privilege, do not be daunted by brevity or a certain shortness of breath. Take a leaf from this author's own books. In a succession of brief, single-worded titles, amongst them Sula, Beloved, Jazz, Paradise, Love, Toni Morrison has unburdened the American past of its darkest secrets and unbarred the gates of world literature. With remarkable courage and creativity, she has mined the hard stone of unthinking habit and unforgiving circumstance to expose the finer metal of the American character. Morrison's work is the excavation of genius rather than its mere expression. She has taught us to dig deep where it's difficult to dig, to expose the depths to light, to hollow out the stone and make a dwelling place for life and language. The landscape beyond this room is without color, Morrison writes in Love, her most recent novel. Just a bleak ridge of stone and no one to imagine it otherwise, because that is the way it is, as deep, deep down as everybody knows. An unborn world where sound, any sound, the scratch of a claw, the flap of webbed feet, is a gift, where human voice is the only miracle and the only necessity. The distance between this room and that bleak ridge of stone is bridged by the depth of the human voice. It is the excavating voice that brings forth the sounds of a yet unborn world, and it is both the miracle and necessity of that voice to build the house of fiction. The enduring architecture of Morrison's fiction is at first built around the homes of the haunted, 124 Bluestone Road and Beloved, or Consolata's sanctuary of the lost and displaced, Paradise, or the tenement of temptation and passion, Jazz, or the resort hotel of the wounded and damaged, Love. Morrison's miraculous gift lies in turning these habitations of historical trauma and violence into enduring spaces of ethical deliberation, political regeneration, and personal survival. Beloved, Paradise, and Love parade their broken lives and battle lines, place, space, gender, race, generation, but Morrison quickens us to enter into the spirit of what she calls rememory, that form of remembering or reassembling the human experience, putting our lives and our stories together again in bits and pieces, building or rebuilding our homes brick by brick. Morrison's House of Fiction has shaped the life of this nation and the world beyond because it forces us to live and think beyond our means, beyond the gated communities of what passes for common sense, beyond the sanitized suburbs of what is suppressed and segregated. She challenges us to live forever in pursuit of the human interest, and she makes her art from spirit and passion overspent. Let me end with a song written by Toni Morrison for Kathleen Battle that draws together what is perhaps her most enduring theme, that is, the sudden discovery of freedom, of being at home in the midst of a world to which you were brought, not born. Whose house is this? Whose night keeps out the light in here? Say, who owns this house? It is not mine. I had another, sweeter, brighter, with a view of lakes crossed in painted boats, of fields wide as arms open for me. This house is strange. Its shadows lie. Say, tell me, why does its lock fit my key? I have this evening no choice but to choose to sing in the key of Toni Morrison's voice and vision, and to welcome you, Toni, today and always.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Some people are extraordinary at introductions. And Homie certainly is one. I am pleased to be here and delighted that I was able to make this celebration of Wole Soyinka and to be in this company. People sometimes stop me and say to me how much they liked my work and how things they read that I had written had changed their lives and their brain stems. And I tend, of course, I don't believe them, but some part of me sort of does. Not because they are all that persuasive, but because I know what that feels like. And I wanted to make reference very briefly to the people with whom I'm seated. I went to a very packed, sweaty, crowded, terrifically boring book party in New York many years ago, given for Nadine Gordimer. I don't even think I was invited, but I was in publishing, so I could get in. And I only wanted to look at her because I had read a collection of her stories for the first time. My intention was just to look and leave. But I did approach her and murmur, "Your work has been very important to me." I'm sure she doesn't remember this. But she was gracious and said, "Thank you." None of that prepared me for the explosion that was Wole Soyinka. I, in the 70s, had just begun. There was a little shop on 3rd Avenue and 53rd Street that called itself an African bookstore. And it had in it mostly back issues of Black Orpheus and Transition and novels that had been published by British publishers in paperback, etc. Now that was an education for me. And then I came across Soyinka's plays. And it really did affect my brainstem in the sense that you really don't see things the same when you read or encounter a voice like that, or like someone who makes a difference. Derek Walcott, on the other hand, was really a kind of shock. I had the impression, weren't we in school at the same time? Or were you lurking around Howard University? I remember him as a very witty, clever, even handsome, sort of poetical figure, but I had no idea about the level of his talent, like Jamaica spoke of a moment ago, until I read not the first one, but the second collection. And it was shocking in a sense because of its sheer beauty and perception and understanding, but also because I thought I had formed an opinion of Derek Walcott as, a hail fellow well met but not particularly profound. So I have to publicly say now, Derek Walcott, your work has meant an awful lot to me. And certainly has changed the way I see the world. Thanks. I'm going to read from the last novel I published, hoping I can do this without glasses. What do you think? Well, I wrote it. I should remember, don't you think? This is the voice that I needed in order to help me tell what I thought was a very complicated story. And this is the voice of the woman who controls some of the lives of the people in the narrative, who opens the book, closes it, and intervenes at will whenever she chooses. The women's legs are spread wide open, so I hum. Men grow irritable, but they know it's all for them, and they relax. Standing by, unable to do anything but watch, is a trial, but I don't say a word. My nature is a quiet one, anyway. As a child, I was considered respectful. As a young woman, I was called discreet. Later on, I was thought to have the wisdom maturity brings. Nowadays, silence is looked on as odd, and most of my race has forgotten the beauty of meaning much by saying little. Now, tongues work all by themselves with no help from the mind. Still, I used to be able to have normal conversations, and when the need arose, I could make a point strong enough to stop a wound or a knife. Not anymore, because back in the 70s, when women began to straddle chairs and dance crotch out on television, when all the magazines started featuring behinds and inner thighs, as though that's all there is to a woman, well, I shut up altogether. Before women agreed to spread in public, there used to be secrets, some to hold, some to tell. Now, no. Barefaced being the order of the day, I hum. Words dance in my head to the music in my mouth. People come in here for a plate of crawfish or to pass the time and never notice or care that they do all the talking. I'm background. The movie music that comes along when the sweethearts see each other for the first time, or when the husband is walking the beachfront alone, wondering if anybody saw him doing the bad thing he couldn't help. My humming encourages people, frames their thoughts, like when Mildred Pierce decides she has to go to jail for her daughter. I suspect, soft as it is, my music has that kind of influence too. The way mood indigo, drifting across the waves, can change the way you swim. Doesn't make you dive in, but it can set your stroke or trick you into believing you are both smart and lucky. So why not swim further and a little further still? What's the deep to you? It's way down below and has nothing to do with blood made bold by coronets and piano keys, does it? Of course, I don't claim that kind of power. My hum is mostly below range, private, suitable for an old woman embarrassed by the world. Her way of objecting to how the century is turning out, where all is known and nothing understood. Maybe it was always so, but didn't strike me until some 30 years ago that prostitutes looked up to for their honesty have always set the style. Well, maybe it wasn't their honesty. Maybe it was their success. Still, straddling a chair or dancing half naked on TV, these 90s women are not all that different from the respectable women who live around here. This is coast country, humid and God-fearing, where female recklessness runs too deep for short shorts or thongs or cameras. But then or now, decent underwear or none, wild women never could hide their innocence. A kind of pity-kitty hopefulness that their prince was on his way. Especially the tough ones with their box cutters and dirty language, or the glossy ones with two-seated cars and a pocketbook full of dope. Even the ones who wear scars like presidential medals and stockings rolled at their ankles can't hide the sugar child, the winsome baby girl curled up somewhere inside, between the ribs, say, or under the heart. Naturally, all of them have a sad story. Too much notice, not enough, or the worst kind. Some tale about dragon daddies and false-hearted men, or mean mamas and friends who did them wrong. Each story has a monster in it who made them tough instead of brave, so they open their legs rather than their hearts, where that folded child is tucked. Sometimes the cut is so deep, no woe is me tale is enough. Then the only thing that does the trick, that explains the craziness heaping up, holding down, and making women hate one another and ruin their children, is an outside evil. People in Up Beach, where I'm from, used to tell about some creatures called police heads, dirty things with big hats, who shoot up out of the ocean to harm loose women and eat disobedient children. My mother knew them when she was a girl, and people dreamed wide awake. They disappeared for a while, but came back with new and bigger hats, starting in the 40s, when a couple of see there what I tell you things happened at the shore. Like that woman who furrowed in the sand with her neighbor's husband, and the very next day suffered a stroke at the cannery, the grappling knife still in her hand. She wasn't but 29 at the time. Another woman, she lived over in Silk and wouldn't have anything to do with Up Beach people. Well, she hid a flashlight and a purchase deed in the sand of her father-in-law's beachfront one evening, only to have a loggerhead dig them up in the night. The miserable daughter-in-law broke her wrist trying to keep the breezes and the clan away from the paper she'd stolen. Of course, nobody flat out saw any police heads during the shame of these guilty women, but I knew they were around. Knew what they looked like, too, because I'd already seen them in 1942, when some hard-headed children swam past the safety rope and drowned. As soon as they were pulled under, thunderclouds gathered above a screaming mother and a few dumb-struck picnickers, and in a blink those clouds turned into gape-mouthed profiles wearing wide-brimmed hats. Some folks heard rumbling, but I swear I heard whoops of joy. From that time on through the 50s, they loitered above the surf or hovered over the beach, ready to pounce around sunset, when lust is keenest, when loggerheads hunt nests, and negligent parents get drowsy. Of course, most demons get hungry at supper time, like us. But police heads, they like to troll at night, too, especially when the hotel was to clean up a little domestic work here. Thank you very much. Especially when the hotel was full of visitors drunk with dance music or salt air or tempted by starlit water. Those were the days when Cozy's Hotel and Resort was the best and best-known vacation spot for colored folk on the East Coast. Everybody came. Lil Green and Father Hines, T-Bone Walker, Jimmy Lunsford, the Drops of Joy, and guests from as far away as Michigan and New York couldn't wait to get down here. Sucker Bay was swirled with first lieutenants and brand new mothers, with young school teachers, landlords, doctors, businessmen. All over the place, children rode their fathers' lake shanks and buried uncles up to their necks in sand. Men and women played croquet and got up baseball teams whose goal was to knock a homer into the waves. Grandmothers watched over red thermos jugs with white handles and hampers full of crab meat salad and ham, chicken, yeast rolls, and loaves of lemon-flavored cake. Oh, my. Then all of a sudden, in 1958, bold as a posse, the police heads showed up in bright morning. A clarinet player and his bride drowned before breakfast. The inner tube they were floating on washed ashore, dragging wads of scale-cluttered beard hair. Whether the bride had played around during the honeymoon was considered and whispered about, but the facts were muddy. She sure had every opportunity. Cozy's Resort had more handsome single men per square foot than any place outside Atlanta or even Chicago. They came partly for the music, but mostly to dance by the sea with pretty women. After the drowned couple were separated, sent to different funeral parlors, you'd think women up to no good and mule-headed children wouldn't need further warning because they knew there was no escape. Fast as lightning, nighttime or day, police heads could blast up out of the waves to punish wayward women or swallow the misbehaving young. Only when the resort failed did they sneak off like pickpockets from a bread line. A few people still sinking crab castles in the back bays probably remember them, but with no more big bands or honeymooners, with the boats and the picnics and swimmers gone. When Sucker Bay became a treasury of sea trash, sea junk, and Up Beach itself drowned, nobody needed or wanted to recall big hats and scaly beards. But it's 40 years on now. The Cozys have disappeared from public view, and I'm afraid for them almost every day. Except for me and a few fish shacks, Up Beach is 20 feet underwater. But the hotel part of Cozy's Resort is still standing, sort of standing. Looks more like it's rearing backwards, away from hurricanes and a steady blow of sand. It's odd what oceanfront can do to empty buildings. You can find the prettiest shells right up on the steps, like scattered petals or cameos from a Sunday dress, and you wonder how they got there, so far from the ocean. Hills of sand piling in porch corners and between banister railings are whiter than the beach and smoother like twice-sifted flour. Foxglove grows waist-high around the gazebo, and roses, which all the time hate our soil, rage here, with more thorns than blackberries and weeks of beet-red blossoms. The wood siding of the hotel looks silver-plated, its peeling pink like the streaks on an unpolished tea service. The big double doors are padlocked. So far, nobody has smashed their glass panels. Nobody could stand to do it because the panels mirror your own face as well as the view behind your back. Acres of chive grass edging the sparkly beach, a movie screen sky, and an ocean that wants you more than anything. No matter the outside loneliness, if you look inside, the hotel seems to promise you ecstasy and the company of all your best friends. And music, the shift of a shutter hinge sounds like the cough of a trumpet. Piano keys waver a quarter note above the wind, so you might miss the hurt jamming those halls and closed-up rooms. Our weather is soft, mostly, with peculiar light. Pale mornings fade into white noons. Then by 3 o'clock, the colors are savage enough to scare you. Jade and sapphire waves fight each other, kicking up enough foam to wash sheets in. An evening sky behaves as though it's from some other planet, one without rules, where the sun can be plum purple if it wants to, and clouds can be red as poppies. Our shore is like sugar, which is what the Spaniards thought of when they first saw it. Sucra, they called it, a name local whites tore up for all time into succa. Nobody could get enough of our weather, except when the cannery smell got to the beach and into the hotel. Then guests discovered what up-beach people put up with every day and thought that was why Mr. Cozy moved his family out of the hotel and built that big house on Monarch Street. Fish odor didn't used to be all that bad a thing in these parts, like marsh stench and privies. It just added another variety to the senses. But in the 60s, it became a problem. A new generation of females complained about what it did to their dresses and their appetite and their idea of romance. This was around the time the world decided perfume was the only smell the nose was meant for. I remember Vida trying to calm the girlfriend of a famous singer who was carrying on about her steak tasting like conch. That hurt me because I have never failed in the kitchen. Later on, Mr. Cozy told people that's what ruined his business, that the whites had tricked him, let him buy all the oceanfront he wanted because the cannery, so close to it, kept it unprofitable. The fish smell had turned his resort into a joke. But I know that the smell that blanketed up beach hit Sucre Bay only once or twice a month, and never from December to April, when crab castles were empty and the cannery closed. No, I don't care what he told people. Something else wrecked his resort. Freedom, May said. She tried hard to keep the place going when her father-in-law lost interest and was convinced that civil rights destroyed her family and its business, by which she meant colored people were more interested in blowing up cities than dancing by the seashore. She was like that, May. But what started out as mule-headed turned into crack-brained. Fact is, folks who bragged about cozy vacations in the 40s boasted in the 60s about Hyatts and Hiltons and cruises to the Bahamas and Ocho Rios. Truth is, neither shellfish nor integration was to blame. Never mind the woman with the conch-flavored steak. Customers will sit next to a privy if it's the only way they can hear Wilson Pickett or Nellie Lutcher. Besides, who can tell one odor from another while pressed close to a partner on a crowded dance floor listening to Harbor Lights? And while May kept blaming Martin Luther King every day for her troubles, the hotel still made money, although with a different clientele. You listen to me. Something else was to blame. Besides, Mr. Cozy was a smart man. He helped more colored people here than 40 years of government programs. And he wasn't the one who boarded up the hotel and sold 75 acres to an equal opportunity developer for 32 houses built so cheap my shack puts them to shame. At least my floors are hand-planed oak, not some slicked-up pine. And if my beams aren't ruler smooth, at least they're true and properly aged when hoisted. Before Up Beach drowned in a hurricane called Agnes, there was a drought with no name at all. The sale had just closed, the acres barely plotted, when Up Beach mothers were pumping mud from their spigots. Dried up wells and bracky water scared them so they gave up the sight of the sea and applied for a 2% HUD mortgage. Rainwater wasn't good enough for them anymore. Trouble, unemployment, hurricanes following droughts, marshland turned into mud cakes so dry even the mosquitoes quit. I saw all that as life simply being itself. Then the government houses went up, and they named the neighborhood Oceanside, which it isn't. The developers started outselling to Vietnam veterans and retired whites. But when Oceanside became a target for people thrown out of work into food stamps, churches and this affirmative action stuff got busy. Welfare helped some till urban renewal came to town. Then there were jobs all over the place. Now it's full of people commuting to offices and hospital labs 22 miles north, traveling back and forth from those cheap, pretty houses to malls and movieplexes. They're so happy they haven't had a cloudy thought, let alone a memory of police heads. They didn't cross my mind either until I started to miss the cozy women and wonder if they'd finally killed each other. Who besides me would know if they were dead in there? One vomiting on the steps, still holding the knife that cut the throat of the one that fed her the poison. Or if one had a stroke after shooting the other and not able to move, starved to death right in front of the refrigerator. They wouldn't be found for days, not until Sandler's boy needed his weekly pay. Maybe I'd best leave off the TV for a while. I used to see one of them driving along in that rusty old Oldsmobile to the bank or in here once in a while for Salisbury steak. Otherwise, I haven't left that house in years. Not since one of them came back carrying a Walmart shopping bag, and you could tell by the set of her shoulders she was whipped. The white Samsonite baggage she left with was nowhere in sight. I thought the other one would slam the door in her face, but she didn't. I guess they both knew they deserved each other. Meaner than most and standoffish, They have the regular attention that disliked folks attract. They live like queens in Mr. Cozy's house. But since that girl moved in there a while ago with a skirt as short as underpants and no underpants at all, I've been worried about them leaving me here with nothing but an old folks' tale to draw on. I know it's trash, just another story made up to scare wicked females and correct unruly children. That's all I have. I know I need something else, something better, like a story that shows how brazen women can take a good man down. I can hum to that.
Thank you, Toni. I'm especially pleased that my dear friend Kwame Anthony Appiah, the Lawrence S. Rockefeller University Professor of Philosophy and the University Center for Human Values at Princeton University, is here on this special occasion to introduce our mutual treasured friend and our honored guest, Wole Soyinka.
Not quite sure what I'm doing in this exalted company, but anyway. The paradox of the man who needs no introduction is that he has so many accomplishments that you ought to mention in introducing him. Accomplishments, of course, that your audience already well knows. But in Asante, my homeland, when great men and women enter a public square, heralds will shout their appellations, those names which, like Homeric epithets, reflect their special accomplishments. And those appellations report exactly what everybody already knows. I'm no griot, and I don't have the training of an Achiami, as we call our public orators, but I hope you will allow my simple prose to serve to honor, as a praise poem does, the great man it's my privilege to herald this evening. Here's some of what you already know. Wole Soyinka is one of the greatest playwrights of our time, indeed, of any time. Perhaps it helps that his initials are W.S. But he is also, as again you know, one of the most widely anthologized modern poets. He is, but this you know too, the subject of two of the world's most enthralling autobiographies, even if he himself, called Ake and Ishara, attempts to avoid autobiography. Who can forget Essay and Wild Christian, Father and Mother, or the amazing Yoruba world that he shares with us in those books? You know, too, that he's an acclaimed novelist, that he wrote in The Man Died, one of the greatest prison memoirs of the last century, a century that provided, alas, too many occasions for such memoirs. Because you know this, you almost certainly know, too, that Soyinka has been the consummate intellectual as activist in Nigeria, intervening with courage and intelligence and humor in many of the saddest moments of a country whose modern history has many sad moments. So what can I tell you that you may not know? Well, here's one final fact for you, which I learned some 30 years ago when we dined together in restaurants in that other Cambridge over the seas. His knowledge and appreciation of fine wines is profound. You knew, of course, that he was a Nobel Laureate. Perhaps you even knew that he was a Chevalier of the Légion d'honneur. But did you also know that he's a Chevalier of the Commanderie des Divines Bouteilles, an organization he regards as fundamentally literary because one of its founders was Rabelais. So, dear friends, I ask you, as Skip did at the start, to give it up tonight for my good friend, the actor, autobiographer, bon vivant, cosmopolitan, critic, director, dramatist, essayist, filmmaker, Nobel Laureate, novelist, enophile, poet, and political activist, the Yoruba, the Nigerian, the African, and now, amazingly, the septuagenarian Wole Soyinka.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I believe in karma. I didn't until I met Skip Gates. So I know that karma follows one around in various existences. I know this to be true because I've lived a blameless life. I don't swear, I don't smoke, whatever else you hear, I don't drink, I don't philander. So why was I ever inflicted with this phenomenon called Skip Gates? It must be something I did in prior life. Maybe I was a bartender and I was putting water in people's wines, one of the greatest crimes one can commit, in one's previous life. Well, whatever it is, Skip gets me into these things, and I end up not altogether regretting them. In fact, they can turn out, like tonight, to be a great pleasure. Who else has succeeded in bringing us together? I've been on stage with Nadine, with Toni, with Derek, but I had never been on stage at any time with all of them. And so it's this character here who you must thank for giving me that immeasurable delight. So something good comes out of it. I also found it easier to present myself tonight when we agreed that I was not going to sit down and be read at, but that I would participate in the reading. It made things a lot easier. And then I thought, what shall I read? You've heard that I don't like, I try to avoid writing biography. I end up writing Soyinka, son of Soyinka, Soyinka rides again, all in bits and pieces, and so on and so forth. And so, in answer to the question, which one gets, you're familiar with the question, what are you working on? And I would say, I don't talk about it. But I can reveal, simply because it's very close now, and will probably come out definitely next year. I have been working on Soyinka rides backwards all over again. And so I thought, let me give you a preview, a little taste of what I've been doing with what sort of amounts to a chaotic life. As a friend of mine, she's late now, that erratic genius of the theater, Joan Littlewood, and I remember when she was writing her biography, we shared the same editor, Strawn, in London. I came across that poor man with a wet towel around his head and ice blocks, and he was absolutely inundated by stacks and stacks and stacks of paper, of manuscript. And I said, what is that? He said, it's Joan trying to write her memoirs. And if there was anything else which dissuaded me from ever attempting to write my memoirs, it was that sight. But, we never learn. And I decided I would tackle it anyway. And I've driven 3 editors mad already. And I hope that by the time it's over, something readable will come out. But whether or not, I'm going to read you a little section of it. This section is entitled, A Digression on the Purpose of Accidents. Actually, I could retitle it, Accidents as a Necessity of a Ritual in the Theater. I'm writing here about my experience in the theater, mostly about disasters, and trying to find a reason for some of them. And I found that sometimes it's because the necessary rituals were not performed. They always look for excuses. So I write here about certain incidents when ritual presented itself and what were the consequences of carrying out the rituals or not carrying out the rituals. No culture is known to exist where the beginnings of drama have not been traced to the rituals of the society. It goes without saying, therefore, that the fortunes of a play may depend on a respect or disrespect for ritual observance, especially in those instances when ritual comes knocking on the stage door, unbidden, and is either welcomed or denied entry. My production of The Road at the Goodman Theatre in Chicago proved to be, beyond a doubt, yet another of those instances of a clear correlation between a ritual festival denied and the consequences for a production. My assistant in that production, Malcolm, was uncharacteristically late for rehearsal one Sunday night. He had driven home for the weekend break, and on his way back, racing to return in time for the Monday resumption of rehearsals, a deer ran into the highway and attacked his motorcar, getting the worst of the encounter. Thereupon, Malcolm proceeded to wait until the state patrol arrived. The story was so unreal, so surreal, that at first I thought he had been hallucinating. "Are you sure that you were struck by a deer?" I persisted. "No, the deer ran across the highway. He tried to quibble." I was having none of that. "Did the deer and your car collide or not?" He admitted the incident and even offered to show me the dent in the car. Then I thought it all had to do with insurance. Was it a police on-the-spot report essential to ensuring that his car was repaired on his policy? Apparently not. Then I proposed, well, maybe the animal was not dead and he was waiting an ambulance. The Euro-American world is filled with animal lovers of the decidedly lunatic fringe. And maybe it would be considered cruel if he put the animal in the boot of his car. Boot, that's your trunk. We call it boot where I come from. Even for the purpose of taking it to the nearest veterinary clinic. That would still appear a ridiculous proceeding, but I was willing to make allowances. But no, the animal was quite dead, he assured me, dead as warm venison. So what was the problem? It was the law, he explained. He was not permitted to take the game away. In the United States of America, when you knock down game on the roads, it is only the police who can remove it. Malcolm plummeted in my estimation from that moment to a level from which it took quite a while for him to recover. The law? What did the law want of a dead deer? Perform a post-mortem? Was Malcolm a closet vegetarian? I projected myself onto those moments of involuntary deer slaughter and the tame surrender of legitimate kill. Scene: commuters rushing to and fro, minding their own business. Self-sacrificial deer jumps onto the road, hits oncoming car with violence, also damaging the vehicle. Victim driver has been working on The Road, a play about the god Ogun, sacrifice, ritual, and a mystic quest. Knows very well that the director would gladly relieve him of any burden of guilt, if any is felt. Organize an after-rehearsal convention on the mythological symbolism of a stricken deer, even if it required motoring to some wasteland where a bonfire would attract little attention. Malcolm, in short, had a ritual responsibility to have thrown that deer in the boot of his car, trunk, and reported to the director of his production, who would not be bound by any impious American law, where policemen took charge of such carcasses, which then totally disappear from sight. Till today, no one has offered me a credible answer to the question, what happens to the mammals that are carted away by the state police? Incinerated? Sold as dog food? Sent to the veterinary teaching hospitals for dissection? And my assistant tamely hands over a warm-blooded wild game to the police. It was a most cowardly conduct, an act of betrayal and repudiation of every new knowledge I had imparted to the company. It was unacceptable conduct. In a close collaborator, I refused to speak to him outside professional contact for days. And I viewed him with deep suspicion for at least a week afterwards. It will be my fate to be present at such deviant conduct in later years. Once in Cornell University. This time with my former student Skip Gates, then a professor, and a visiting collaborator from the days of Orisun Theatre in Nigeria, that's a Nigerian who was with us, Femi Yuba. Skip was at the wheel of his car when we came upon a freshly slain deer, still warm to the touch. Victim of a hit-and-run driver, perhaps, no more than 10 seconds ahead of our vehicle. Our duty to the world of rationality and ritual was to pick up that deer, repair to Skip's ample garden, and commence proceedings. I had no cooperation. On the contrary, Skip moved his car from the carcass to ensure that he did not heave it myself into the boot. I was becoming schooled in the peculiarity of Americans and contented myself with letting him know that he had inflicted a mortal wound on our friendship. The Chicago experience remained my introduction to the wastrel habit of American drivers after they had been victims of assault by a rampaging gang. A little more education and such drivers would know that there was only one explanation for such accidents. They are a gift from Ogun and should be honored as such. Atop a funeral pyre with accompanying music of popping corks and roasting peppers. It is that play, The Road, appropriately, that commends the formulation of the image of the dying calf for any disasters I would later incur on stage. I begin this section with an image of the dying calf when you watch your play die on stage. The contribution to that dismal experience by the local actor was of such a nature and dimension that he became known as the Dark Hole. So resolutely did he suck the energies and vitality of the rest of the company into the antimatter of his stage presence. The play should have been retitled, for that production, The Eclipse. As for the director, hidden in a corner seat, having long abandoned the pointless exercise of note-taking, I had only one wish left in the world, to sink into the theater vomitorium and be deposited directly into the underworld. Since that vanishing trick refused to oblige, I considered myself guilty of a double dereliction of duty by failing to step onto the stage in the middle of the ongoing performance, apologizing to the audience for having abused their evening out, and would they please leave now and collect their entry fees at the box office, with a glass of champagne plus canapes, compliments of the establishment, and free theater seats for the rest of the season. And if anyone felt that this was not sufficient to assuage their assaulted dignity, they were invited to remain behind and witness an impeccable demonstration of a classic exit to be performed by the director in that terminal idiom known as seppuku. When that evening is contrasted with another in the same theater, the production of Death and the King's Horseman, the difference is instructive. This was a production that was bedeviled by more than the usual production problems, giving off the feeling sometimes that the entire project was under a severe psychic attack, threatening the very survival of the actors. Despite such malevolence, however, this production in Chicago and at the J.F. Kennedy Center in Washington, not its post-Nobel revival at the Lincoln Center, which was another story, proved to be an aesthetic and critical success, a rare combination. In Chicago, however, where it received its American premiere, accidents of a physical nature threatened the very emergence on stage. accidents on the highways, within the city, and within the theater. Unlike the road, no divine signal in the form of a protective accident came our way, only debilitating ones, such as that of the character Mrs. Pilkins, the wife of the district officer, whose leg remained in a plaster cast till only a few days' performance, duplicating the cast in plaster cast spectacle of another production of mine in Siena. No equivalent of Abraham's ram was spied entangled in the rigging, pointing us in the direction of what the gods demanded. Instead, it was a stage hand who got nearly hanged in the ceiling, did his best to substitute. He landed barely 1 inch away from the concrete flooring and the certainty of a shattered spine. Once, giving directions from beside a plush curtain that covered an exit in the auditorium, I escaped, literally by the whisker, the certain pulverization of my chin. I felt my goatee swept violently aside by an offensive weapon that was inadvertently launched by one of the actors awaiting his entry. Of course, it had to be the actor. He was also a fanatic bodybuilder. My beard was swept aside, and such was the gale force that followed in the wake of that truncheon that I finally understood the origin of the expression, a close shave. I was astonished to find my beard still intact. And then the illnesses. In so many ways, the seeds of another production appear to have been sown in the halls of Chicago. There was a clear demand by invisible forces for some rites of exorcism. The black actors were of the same mind, but the management, fully in agreement that some kind of psychic remedy was called for, balked at the proposed format. The Chicago state bylaws, I was made to understand, forbade the slaughtering of a ram within the city limits. And what of a cockerel? I asked. It made no difference. The Chicago city fathers definitely frowned on the conversion of public buildings to private butcheries. The accidents continued. The management let it be known that their position had not changed, but observed that they were not equipped to prevent any illegal act that was committed without their knowledge. It was thus left to the company to let management know roughly between what hours the company might conduct any purely conjectural illegal act. After the theater had closed on the appointed night during a week of the theatrical run of another play, the entire company, both black and white, plus the technical director, assembled under the stage, gathered around a white, outsized cockerel, smuggled in by one of the actors. Kola nut was offered, libation, moonshine, for lack of palm wine in its distilled form, ogogoro, we call it, was poured. The bird was put out of its misery. I improvised the ritual, sprinkled blood to the hidden corners beneath the stage, and smeared some more on the spots of the major near accidents. The cockerel was then prepared in the apartment of one of the actors and consumed, each member of the cast eating a piece, however tiny. Miraculously, the accidents ceased. Not one more actor so much as stubbed a toe in the darkened theater, tripped over wiring, or suffered alcohol poisoning. Neither during the rest of the rehearsals nor through the lengthy run. Not even when the production left the scene of the sacrificial cockerel and transferred to the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. If the spate of accidents had continued, I had my defense. Substituting a cockerel for a ram and other forms of improvisation on stage are all very well for humans, but the deities reserve the right of a final critical rejection or approval. Thank you very much.
No. Okay, now it is. Now it is. While they, we have time just for a few questions, but while they are mic'd, And then after questions, we're going to have a special presentation, something very, very special. But just going to be a couple questions. But while we're mic'd, ladies and gentlemen, one more time, let's give it up for a season of Warriors.
I don't know whether we deserve all this.
Okay, you know the drill. Identify yourself, ask your question. And be brief, no speeches. Okay.
Hi, my name is Namwali Serpel. I'm a graduate student in the English department here, and I had a question for Wole Soyinka and Toni Morrison specifically, but the other authors are welcome to answer it as well. I've been taught your texts, and I've also taught your novels as a graduate student here, as a teaching fellow. And I have to say, in both Professor Morrison's work and in Professor Soyinka's work, I've often confronted the problem of not knowing, as have many of my students. I wanted to ask you how you feel about being taught as opposed to being read. And I also wanted to ask you whether you have a particular perspective on not knowing.
Well, I think having a novel taught is what? Not talking to me. Oh, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I think being taught a novel is reading the novel. You can read it with other people in a class. You can read it by yourself, or you can read it under the advice and instruction of a professor. It's all reading, so I don't find those activities contradictory. The not knowing part of your question is interesting in a very, less complicated way than you might think. Sometimes I hear music I have heard music, as we all have, when you're 12 or 15 or 16, and liked it or disliked it. Or maybe you were indifferent. You hear the same music 10 years later, 25 years later. It's different. You may really dislike it, or you may really understand it in a way you didn't before. You may have changed. The music may not have. I like music one of the reasons one listens over and over and over again to music is because it has not the not knowing, but a kind of incompleteness that the listener cannot apprehend. And the books I like that. There are books that I have read at one time in my life that I understood one way. You read them later, you understand another. Later, another. It's a bottomless kind of gift. So that the absence of knowing the final thing about a book, for me, is I anticipate at some point. Either I arrive at that level or I don't. But whatever happens, I am not hurt or limited or confined by not knowing every single thing.
Wally?
Yeah, I think that sums it up really. I mean, I don't see the contradiction between teaching and reading. I think but for your students, you might like to tell them this story. When I was a student, I remember, I think it was a very short play, such a long time I read it now. And I had to write an essay on it, and I thought I'd grasp the play, but suddenly there was this character who said, "The cat's on the tiles." And in my essay, I said, the man went crazy at that point. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said, the statement seems so irrelevant, and so, what? Cat's on the essay, I said, I think at that point the man must have gone crackers. And my tutor said, "You never heard this expression before?" I said, "What expression? Well, is that an expression? In the context, what is the cat doing on the tiles?" And then he explained to me that, what exactly it meant. And of course, it enriched my knowledge of both the play and the character later. So I don't think I think in every work of art, there is something one does not know, or one even misinterprets. But that story might be useful for you, but I agree absolutely with what Toni said.
Thank you. Yes?
Good evening. Thank you for spending this time with us. My name is Terrence Gilchrist. I consider myself an spiritual man become an educator, entrepreneur, writer, and musician.
That's a hell of a card, brother.
It comes out of a wall that says that, okay. No. I want to know that despite the vicissitudes of life, how do you, and this is addressed to everyone on the dais, how do you remain centered as a writer and passionate enough to contribute your voice to the world? I was speaking with a gentleman earlier whose wife happens to be a writer, and asked him the same question. And he said that she does two types of techniques. One, she does a free write.
A what?
A free write. I suppose it's like something like a stream of consciousness.
Okay.
Oh, automatic write.
Automatic, right? Okay.
Okay. And she'll just let herself, just write. Another technique is to take herself away from a situation and go to like a writer's colony or something else. But just interested, how do you go through this process, whether you're in jail or whether you're raising children, or what is it that keeps you going?
Okay, thank you. Nadine?
Well, I really think it's the mystery, that's the whole reason. You cannot explain why you write, and the idea that there's a certain process to be gone through. It's rather like saying in order to get a good part in the theatre you must sleep with a director. I'm afraid it is inexplicable. My only explanation for it is that if you're going to be an opera singer, you're going to be born with a certain set of vocal cords, which most of us do not have. And you could train as a singer for the rest of your life, but you're never going to. You haven't got the right vocal cords. And it's the same thing with a writer. You either are born with this particular ability, this particular grasp of shifting reality that is one's life, or you are not. That's why I don't believe at all in writing schools, in creative schools of writing. It's probably a
better person because you are a splendid or wonderful artist. You may occupy a different place in society, but it doesn't help with anything else, and it's not supposed to. It is that thing itself. It's where writers go, or certainly I go, to be completely free, with no one telling me what to do. And where all the expectations are the ones I set, and the successes are always my version of how far I have leaped. Every other aspect in my life may be happy or unhappy or confused or whatever, but not in that place. So that the dilemma is that you really do hope that reading somebody's work makes a profound and an improved difference in their lives. Just knowledge, not necessarily happiness, just perceiving something or seeing something that you would otherwise not have seen. And that is its own worth. But nevertheless, it does not increase one's own personal happiness. And the suggestion that it might, other than fabulous riches such as the one Soyinka has accumulated, other than that, it's not going to make your life any better.
Anyone else?
Actually, I met, when I did that seminar last week, I actually met somebody who came up to me and, I thought I was going to talk about this subject, and he said, "Glad to meet you. I was told you're one of the 6 richest people in Nigeria." I said, "Amen."
Now your secret's out. Sir.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Michael. I'm a student here at the KSG, and I would like to ask a question to Professor Soyinka, the activist. Professor Gates and Professor Appiah reminded us about your activism during the darkest time of Nigeria. But could you elaborate more on what should be nowadays the role of civil society in strengthening African democratic institutions, particularly in Nigeria, maybe?
I think what in civil society is threatening, or is
Strengthening. Getting...
Strengthening.
Oh, strengthening. Ah, okay, strengthening. It's a very difficult question, because I hate to answer in the negative. All I can just tell you is that people have become more and more politicized, more and more aware of the possibilities of their civic strength. And that is because of the struggles they have been through. In other words, it's like you undergo so many, and I'm not talking of Nigeria alone, you undergo so many years of tyranny, of military despotism, of cruelties and dehumanization, and suddenly there's a breaking point, and the people realize, and usually led by, organizations, that this chain can be broken. And from that experience, you gain even more strength. So and then of course you look at the examples, instances taking place across the border, over the border. There's greater communication, there's greater collaboration, and that goes on to such an extent that even the club of political leaders, whether regional or continental, begin to take note, and they reduce the burden, in some cases, on the people whom they're governing. So it's a kind of mutual assistance project, knowledge, capability, contact with other people, communication, and in some cases, the deliberate teaching, educating of the cadres of civil society. That happens not only within the countries, but outside.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have time, unfortunately, for only one more question. Yes, and then we have a presentation.
Thank you so much for, I think, what was for all of us an unforgettable experience. Professor Morrison, when I was an undergraduate nearly 20 years ago, you allowed me to interview you. I was at Yale. You were incredibly kind to me. And during that interview, you spoke of your desire, and I'll never forget your phrasing, to speak an outlaw language in your work, and it has stayed with me all this time. And my question is for all of you: how do you take your political passions and translate them into literary beauty? So many people have those passions, other people have the writing skills, but so few are able to merge them, and yet all of you have mastered that very particular art. And I wondered how you negotiate that, and also how you do that through the language, the form of language itself.
You want to ask each one?
Well, whoever wants to answer.
Derek, would you like to start? Dinner's waiting, yes.
I'm very scared of being glib in trying to reply. And when you're up on a platform and you're asked these questions that you have to simplify in response to, then you sound maybe a little pompous. I don't know that anybody here, any writer, deliberately separates political passion from experience. I think the thing is simultaneous, depending on the intensity of the experience that you're defining. I cannot conceive of being in solitary confinement for more than 2 days. But Soyinka has done it, and he's here. What is it? What kind of strength? I don't think I'm capable of that strength. But you never know. Some of the great poets of Russia did not want to be martyrs. Nobody wants to be a hero, really, not at that expense. But I think if you go through an experience such as Soyinka has done, or say Mandelstam has done, or any writer, that sometimes writers, male or female, can find a strength that astonishes them. And when that astonishment is found, then we find writers who are examples of human fortitude. And I think I'm a natural coward, and that I'd confess to anything just to get off, Yeah, I blew up the building, I'm sorry, okay. I think that's my nature. On the other hand, I'm sure that every Russian punished writer probably felt incapable of what is heroic. And yet these are the ordinary men who were not geniuses because they endured suffering, but because they had to write. Whether they had to write like Soyinka on a piece of toilet paper or try to memorize what they know. The quality of human endurance is a staggering thing. It's bigger than any bomb. It's bigger than any disaster. That strength that is within probably every human being. And I think that a writer talking about trying to separate the distinction between writing politically or writing humanly, I think they're simultaneous.
Nadine?
I think that the question of whether you are a political writer, a committed writer or not, is a false one. To be a writer is to be committed, indeed, to exploring the mystery of life, the whole question of being human. And this, of course, brings in your social and your political relations. I like to think of it as when you are being born, as you come down the birth canal of your mother, your head is being formed, the shape of your head. It's not until that happens that you've really got the proper shape to your head. And this is a medical fact, yes. Now, I think there's another process that the society you're born into, especially if it's a society of conflict, such as indeed Wole's was and mine has been, there's another process of shaping you. That head is not yet fully shaped, all that is in it. The personality is not. It is shaped not only from your own personality from inside, something that perhaps is genetically passed on, but it is shaped by the circumstances of your life, by the society around you. And I think it's out of this that so-called committed writing comes, because you do not live in a vacuum, in a personal vacuum. The kind of society that you're born into, the laws, the particular effect of the laws on you and on the other people around you. This indeed forms your sense of the world, and if you're a writer, it will bring together the personal development and the societal and political development. It's unavoidable. You wouldn't have anything write about. You couldn't possibly ignore the shaping of your personality, of your head, so to speak, that has come about through your position at a particular time in a particular place. And I think that is where the political and the personal come together into the work of the writer.
Toni?
Those were full expressions of what I believe about the role of the writer and the crucible out of which writing comes as a human being writing in the world, so that the distinction does not really exist for me, political versus non-political writing. The old saying is that there is no such thing anyway as non-political writing. There's writing that is political and writing that supports the status quo. But there was a part of the question that had to do with outlaw language, which was of some interest to me when I began to write. Living in the States, where the vernacular, the folk language, was dismissed and despised, not in just made exotic the way other immigrants, or the way immigrants' language has been used as comedy or folk, but really language that has no meaning, the inability to speak, language compared to the sounds of animals. Those are the kinds of judgments and descriptions that were given to Africans coming here. They have no language, they have no gods, they have no weapons. And the same thing has, hovered over the language of African Americans in particular, although at the same time, American English has absorbed, leaned on, been refreshed by that very same language. So what I was interested in doing in the beginning was to render the outlaw language, that is the dismissed and the vernacular, in the way in which I remembered hearing it, which is not a question of subject-verb agreement or even pronunciation, but it had to do with the metaphor. It had to do with the similes. It had to do with the rhythm of a sentence. It had to do with things you can hardly communicate in text, which was intonation, where you have just one word with a question mark. And if you are of the culture, you can hear it. And if you're not, you may not, but that's all right. I had to figure out what William Shakespeare was saying. So the fact that you have to sometimes rely on what you know from the world as a reader, and then that becomes wider known, better understood, and there isn't a closed world at all in the language. It wasn't to be only internal. It was to simply take its juice from within the language and transfer it into the language that could be understood and it certainly at some level appreciated and welcomed by people outside the circle.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Wole?
Yeah, I think your question actually centers on the whole issue of art and experience, the process of transformation. And you heard the piece which was read by Derek. Now, that was a highly political play. Mm. And the lesson of that is that you do not have to have undergone the experience. That it is sufficient to empathize and to have a passion about a situation. And if you're a writer, you will find the means, the medium for expressing that passion and speaking on behalf of humanity. It's also like, another good example is the late Arthur Miller, the play The Crucible. We dealt with the MacArthur lunacy in the United States and went all the way back to the history of the Salem witches. And the statement was clear. It was an elegant, beautiful play, and yet a very cruel play. A play that dealt with human cruelty, with tyranny, and was a warning about the ease with which society can lose its freedom. So please don't, you mustn't make the mistake of thinking that you have to undergo an experience to write about it. There are ways, mythology is full of paradigms for the most contemporary of experiences. It's rather like when I won the Nobel Prize and some ultra radicals, just one or two, telling me that in principle I should reject it. I said, are you mad? I haven't put together $2 in my life and you asked me to throw... I said, in any case, he said because it came of dynamite. I said, who told you I was a pacifist? Did I said, in any case, Jean-Paul Sartre has rejected it on behalf of the rest of us. So let's enjoy it.
Ladies and gentlemen, you all know that W.E.B. Du Bois was the greatest black intellectual of all time. In 1888, he graduated from historically black Fisk University. In 1890, he came to his beloved Harvard and took the A.B. degree. In 1891, he became the first African American to get a master's degree, an A.M. degree in history from Harvard. In 1892, he went to Berlin, where he studied with Max Weber. Can I get my microphone back? Thank you. 1892, he went to the University of Berlin and studied with Max Weber because he wanted to be the father of American sociology. Sociology as a discipline, students, didn't exist in this country at that time. He couldn't get enough funding to satisfy the residency requirement, so he came back with the greatest reluctance to Harvard, and in 1895, he became the first person of African descent to take the PhD in history. His PhD thesis was published a year later as Volume 1 in the Harvard Historical Studies. In 1899, he published one of the first studies of a sociological study of an American city. It was called the Philadelphia Negro. In 1900, he wrote a sentence that turned out to be prophetic, one of the most famous sentences of the 20th century, and that is, the problem of the 20th century would be the problem of the color line. And in 1903, he published a book that was hailed as a classic before the ink was dry, virtually, and became the Bible for African American and African intellectuals at that time, and it remains the Bible a full century later, following its publication. A few years ago, Harvard University created an award in honor of Du Bois. It's our highest award for achievement in both African studies and African American studies. It's called the William Edward Burghardt Du Bois Medal. And it's now my pleasure to confer on our 4 guests, our 4 Nobel Laureates, the coveted W.E.B. Du Bois Medal. It's Nadine? Nadine? You stand up. There. Ladies and gentlemen, a feast of words, a season of laureates. Thank you very much. See what you did? How'd you do that? How'd you do that? Yeah.